This lecture isn't coming from the book. It's just a lecture that I put together to try to help you a little bit with Othello, because Shakespeare's language, of course, since it's written in the late 1500s, early 1600s, a little bit different than our language today. And you have to realize that Shakespeare was writing consciously, very consciously, for an audience, knowing that plays would be performed. And so he has his language patterned. There's distinctive rhythms and repetitions, which allows the audience to keep better track of the action. And he did that purposely. And we have to realize that because there's no internet, there was no movies or TV, most people could not read, so they had much better memories because if you can't read, then you have to memorize everything. You have to remember it. So they were much more accustomed to long speeches and had better focus for that type of thing. And they're also better able to take in spoken language, more so than we are today because it's all they had. There was nothing else to go on. There, of course, there was writing, but the majority of people couldn't read at this time, like I said. So you have to realize that much of Shakespeare's language is archaic. This is because the rapid evolution of the English language. The English language changes incredibly fast. And so a lot of the language that he was using either is no longer used at all or it has evolved into different language. Uh, but some of it is still around, and basically because of his plays. Some of our archaic language is still in existence because Shakespeare's play has kept that language alive. But an awful lot of the words have changed their meaning, so you have to be careful of that. I mean, it's the same thing when you interpret the Bible. The one most famous saying is, the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, meek, when that was written, does not mean what meek means today, right? I mean, meek when it was written meant those who act without violence. That's not the same uh, definition or connotation that we have today. And so the same thing, you have to be aware of that with Shakespeare's language. All right, so thou gets used a lot. I mean, anytime anybody wants to speak like Shakespeare, just throw in a lot of thous. But you have to use thou, you have to understand was being used by parents to children. You was actually more respectful at that time. But you could use thou with those you were more intimate with. So be aware of that. When we're using you, it's a more respectful term. Thou, more of a familiar term. All right, now the register of the language. Uh, Sometimes Shakespeare's actually making the language more difficult than it needs to be, or he's making it easier. And a lot of times this is to express the situation of the character. More difficult language, character may be in a more complex, more difficult situation to understand. The example I'm using here, if you ever read King Lear, who's pretty much gone mad and has no understanding of his world, uh, but then he falls asleep on the heath, and when he wakes up, a clarity has come to him. He understands things now. And this language then is very simple and very clear, easy to understand, because Shakespeare wants to reflect how Lear's mind is difficult. So, I mean, it's now clear. So when language is difficult and it's got a lot of different notes to it, there's a reason. You need to look for that reason. Why did the language get difficult here? And these different modes are called registers. Now, a lot of figurative language in Shakespeare's plays. Probably one of the reasons why he's still considered such a genius. So you get an awful lot of describing one thing by comparing to something else. Here's an example from Troilus speaking of Cressida. Her bed is India, there she lies a pearl. So uh, there you've got to see that we're talking about an entire continent uh, that is somewhat exotic, and she is the jewel of that exotic place. Lear's understanding of the clothes when he's on the heath is another analogy. So through tattered clothes, small vices do appear. And what he's saying is that when someone is not whole, when their character is flawed, those vices appear as, as if through tattered clothes you were seeing the skin. All right, so verse and prose, generally the prose when he's speaking as you and I normally speak, or using his language, but still as you would normally speak to a person, that's just of lower status. When he goes into poetry, this is more elevated, noble status. So the working class characters tend to speak prose, the serious characters tend to speak verse. And they tend to be the more important characters. And you need to be aware of the conventional uses of the language so you can see how the writer's exploring those uses. So just be aware of that. The other thing that he's very well famous for is iambic pentameter. So you've got five stresses of 10 symbols, syllables. You got dot, 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 dot. All right. So, and he uses this to frame it which into work. And you've got things such as Hamlet, repent what's past, avoid what is to come. And when he does that, you're at an important point. When he varies the pattern, it calls attention to it, to those words that we weren't expecting to be stressed. So I am thy Father Spirit. The I in there gets stressed because it's out of place. So just kind of look for that type of thing. So hopefully that helps you a little bit with his language. I know it's a little difficult unless you've read a fair amount of him, and then all of a sudden it starts to come to you just like it's everyday English. But do your best to get through Othello. It's a great play, and it's relevant. I can't tell you how many times jealousy destroyed my life. So you'll find it'll probably destroy yours at one point, or at least destroy a relationship. So you can learn from it.